Those of us who create in polymer clay love to make sculptures and jewelry, but did you know you can also make really great home deck items as well? In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a planter using supplies from the Tribal Create Along box. Hi there, Sandy Huntress here. So if you are going to make a planter, the first thing I would recommend you get is a plant so that you know exactly what size you make. You could make a planter and then spend forever searching for exactly the right plant to go in it. So start with your plant. I have here this adorable little primrose. It was only a couple dollars at my grocery store. And then you want to take some measurements. You just want to get out your ruler and decide how tall and wide your planter needs to be. I'm going to make a tapered one, so we'll measure the width at the top and the width at the bottom and the height. Then just get yourself some cardstock, some scrap paper, something with a little bit of weight. The first thing you're going to do is draw a line that is the height of your planter. So in this case, mine is going to be 4 inches high. Then you want to draw a line on each end perpendicular to that line. You'll end up with something like this. The next thing is to measure to either side of your height line half the distance or half the width at the top and the bottom. So at the top, mine is going to be 4 inches wide, so half of that is 2. So I am going to put a mark at 2 inches away from this center line on either side. Now the bottom of mine is going to be 3 inches wide, so I'm going to make a mark 1.5 inches to either side of this line. Then all you need to do to finish your template is connect those lines. So here it is a little bit more clear. 2 inches on either side for a total of 4-inch width across the top, and 1.5 inches on either side for a total of 3 inches across the bottom. Then you can just trace that or cut it out of another piece of cardstock and you have a template. Trace that onto cardboard, and you want to do this 4 times because we are going to build our planter on a cardboard form. This will not be a permanent part of the planter, it's just what we're going to use to build it. So this is my template for the cardboard form, and you cut out 4 of these. The way you attach them together, and this is just some cardboard from my recycle bin. Like I said, you cut out 4 of these. Just get a little piece of tape that's almost as wide as your form. I'm going to put this slick side on the inside because I want my clay to be against, I don't know if it'll get a shine from this on the inside, so I'm going to put my clay against the cardboard. And I'm just going to put a piece of tape half on and half off that edge. Then I'm going to fold that tape back for a moment. Grab another one of my pieces of cardboard and butt it up right up against that. Stand it up so it's at a 90-degree angle, and then just let that tape go and stick, and now those 2 pieces are stuck together. Then repeat 3 more times. So if this was another cardboard template, you'd add another one and then another until you have the whole thing together. The nice thing about doing it this way is each side is the same width. It's 1 template plus 1 thickness of cardboard wide. So I have a square form to build my piece on. The next thing you want to do is make yourself a second template from the first one. And this one needs to be just a little bit wider on either side, about the thickness of the cardboard or a little bit more. I made mine 1/8 of an inch wider on either side. It can be the same height, but it just gives you a little bit of wiggle room. It gives you something to trim off so it is tidy. So you'll just want to make a template for clay and cut that one out. Now it's time to choose some clay. You do need a fair amount of clay for this. I rolled out a total of about 10 ounces of clay to make this project. This is 8 parts burnt umber, 1 part pearl, and 1 part gold. But you can use scrap clay and paint it. I happen to have a big package of burnt umber, and so I used that to mix the color I liked. This clay is rolled out on the thickest setting of my pasta machine, which is about 2.5 millimeters thick. And if you roll it out on a thick setting, you may have those kind of chatter lines from the gears of your pasta machine. So just take some paper and burnish over the area you're going to cut out with your template to kind of eliminate those lines. Now you'll notice I'm not putting any surface decoration on this clay before cutting it out. It's just so much easier not to, because you may mess it up as you're putting it together. So I'm going to make my basic form and then add decoration on the baked clay. You could add a silk screen or something like that if you wanted. I also found I actually needed my template to be a little bigger. So you might want to go 1/4 inch or more outside of your template, your base template for the cardboard, because you do have the thickness of the cardboard to account for. You'll just have to experiment with the particular cardboard that you're using and your shape and size. So I'm going to actually cut this even a little bit wider. You don't need to do it any taller. There's also the thickness of the clay to account for. All those things to keep in mind when you're building a form on something. Here you can see I've already started building my planter on the form. I have it upside down on a tile. This way, gravity is going to work with us rather than against us. I've built this in a similar manner to the way I did the cardboard, where I have one edge exposed on each side. Although I think because I need to make it wider, I am going to have one edge with actually 2 edges exposed, because these aren't overlapping. These aren't coming out any further. So that's why I cut this last one even wider, and I think that's going to be good. So what you're going to need to do now is add some liquid clay, because we're not going to be pressing really hard on these edges to make them stick. You don't want to add liquid clay to your cardboard. We want to be able to remove that. But you do want to add some to these edges of the clay where it's going to touch the raw clay, because we're not doing really any smoothing at all. So you definitely need this to make them stick. Now that I've added liquid clay to those final 2 edges, I can add my final side. And I'll pick, if there's one side that's nicer than the other, I'll put that out. Just get those as neat as you can make them. Make sure those edges are touching, and then put this whole thing in the oven at the manufacturer's recommended temperature for, I'd give it 45 minutes. So while our planter base is baking, let's make some decorations for it. What I have here is some of the clay rolled out on the same number 2, about 2.5 millimeters thick setting. You could use any clays. This is the base color I've been using, and then the pearl and the gold that I mixed into the burnt umber to make it. You could mix varying amounts of any of these to create different shades. We are going to use these texture plates that come in the tribal box to make little mosaic tiles, and I like to use Armor All. I put just the tiniest bit, like a drop will be enough of a release for all 3 of these. And I like to put it right on the clay rather than spritzing the stamp, because I don't know if it's going to get into every crevice of the stamp. But if I put it on the clay, then I know that the entirety of the clay has a release on it. So you just pick up your piece and place it on the stamp. These really work best if you actually pick them up and press with your fingers. They're nice detailed impressions, And this is the best way to get it. And then you can kind of see from the high spots, areas that you didn't get with your fingers. Once you have it in there well, you can roll over with your acrylic roller if you want. And repeat for as many of these as you like. And with that armor all, that released nicely. I didn't get a great impression there. So I would probably do that again, but I'll just carry on. Then you can add powders or color fuse. The powders go on the top as a rule. I mean, you can put them wherever you want, but generally you can just dip a finger or an applicator. Let's see if I can do a better job with this. Just pay attention. It's because I'm talking and not paying attention to what I'm doing. Let's see. Well, that's better. So it's not a bad idea to trim away the excess clay so you don't use more powder than you need to. These 4 powders come in the Tribal Create Along box. And they're kind of a matte. They're not, it says mineral mica, but they're more a matte finish, which is kind of nice. It's something different. I mean, we all love the shiny, shiny, right? But sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of contrast and have something not quite so shiny. So this, you can use your finger, like I said, or an applicator, and just rub over the top to highlight the texture. You can also use color fuse powders, and these 3 are all color fuse. And these are a little different. They kind of melt into the clay. So what I like to do is apply it all over. And let's see, I think I'm going to do, just because I already did this one, and I'll show you what it looks like. I'm going to do this one. There's not a lot of contrast here, but kind of just pour a bunch on and rub it in lightly. You don't want to destroy your texture, but rub it in. And I'm just going to shake off some of the excess. Then grab some packing tape, and you'll be removing the excess from the top of the pattern, leaving the powder in the deeper parts. And you kind of have to be patient with this. It'll take a few goes with the tape. Before you start to see any difference. And like I said, this one, there isn't a lot of contrast. And when you start to see, I don't know how well you can see that, just clay on the tape, that tells you that you have removed the powders from the surface. And then repeat for as many of these as you want. Once you have all of your powders added, then you can cut these into tiles. Now you can cut them any way you like. I am going to cut mine into 9 pieces, and I'm not really concerned if they are even. I kind of like the idea of them being a little bit irregular, and you can leave them just like that and bake them. If you do want them all to be exactly the same size and shape, you can just use a cutter, like a little 1/2-inch square cutter, and cut out pieces. Bake them, and then you'll have tiles like these that you can use to decorate your planter. So here's my planter out of the oven. It actually looks kind of beat up because I had a bit of a mishap, which I'll tell you more about in a moment. But it does hold together nicely being baked like this. The next thing we want to do, though, is add a base, which will really stabilize it. Notice I'm leaving the cardboard in place for now, just to help keep it steady. So for this step, you'll need some more clay rolled out on whatever setting. I just left it at the 2.5 millimeters thick, just a little bit bigger than the base of your planter. And you'll want to add liquid clay all over these bottom edges. I've added liquid clay all over the bottom. I also took a wipe and just cleaned off any excess that's on the outside edge. I'm going to put this back over my cardboard form. I took it off so I wouldn't accidentally get liquid clay on the cardboard because I want it to remove easily when I'm done. here's my base clay, and I'm just going to place that on there and press. Now you don't want to press so hard that you break something, but you do want it kind of slightly embedded in there. Then you can take a blade and trim. Now notice how that kind of pops up. So when I bake it, I will probably put another tile on top just to press it down so there's good contact between both pieces. When you bake it, I would recommend that you bake it upside down with the wide part at the bottom. It will be more stable that way. Bake that again for a half an hour. Here's my planter out of the oven with the base. It's a little bit of a mess. I am absolutely certain yours is going to look better because you're not going to have the same mishap that I did. But this will look great in the end. We're going to cover up a lot of this mess. I'll tell you about my mishap. So what I did was I had done the 4 sides and then hadn't done the bottom yet, which goes a long way to stabilize this. And what happened was I got all excited and started decorating one of the sides. You can see it here. More about this in a moment. So I decorated one side, and then because of the shape of this, you're going to have to bake each side separately. So I got one side decorated, put it in the oven, and then what happened was because it didn't have the bottom, it just went like this in the oven. And it was a mess. I had to redo one side. If I had had enough clay, I would have just redone the entire thing, but this uses a lot of clay, so I didn't have enough. So now you have a blank canvas that you can do whatever you want to decorate this. And here are a few ideas. You can use these tiles that we made and add a border, or you could cover the entire thing with tiles and have just like a mosaic tiled planter. You can use border molds. This is a border mold that came in a Create Along box quite some time ago. I'm not sure if I like these proportions with the little one on top and the big one on the bottom. More about this in a moment. But other things that were in the tribal box, you can silk screen. This is the Tribal Diamonds silkscreen that came in the Tribal Create Along box. I silk screened an entire sheet and then added strips to this for a border. Other products from the Tribal Create Along box are this stencil. And you could stencil on sheets of clay just like I silk screened with any of the powders, cut those into strips and apply them. Or you could use the Tribal Wave texture sheet. This is really cool. You could have made your tiles out of this or cut strips of this. So many possibilities for decoration. So here are a couple tips for adding the border molds. First of all, here's what I came up with for my final design. I had started by having the small border mold on top and the large one on bottom, and that just didn't look right. So what I've settled on is having the large one on the top and the medium one on the bottom, and I think that looks much better. So there's a couple tricks for helping you with these border molds. They're kind of squishy and can be a little bit difficult to use. But what you want to do is, first of all, put it on a nice, flat, firm surface, and then roll out a bit of clay a little bit smaller than you think you're going to need. It's actually better to underfill these than to overfill these. And you just start pressing it in. Your clay shouldn't be too sticky, otherwise it'll stick to your fingers and keep pulling out of the mold. And even now it's kind of pulling out, and I'm just pushing it back in and paying attention to these edges. What I don't want is for the clay to be spilling out over the edges of the mold, because then that just makes work for yourself later on where you have to trim it. That's why I think it's better to slightly underfill it than to overfill it. So you just work your way down, pressing in, and you kind of use the edge of your fingers to roll it off of this edge of the mold. And if you have an area that's a little thin, you can always just patch in another piece of clay in the back, because that's not going to be visible. If it's too thick, you can kind of pull on this and stretch it. And you just work your way down until you have a strip. And leave yourself a handle at the end so that you can pull the whole thing gently, and it should release right out of the mold. You're going to be decorating and curing each of the 4 sides separately. But it's actually easier to match up your border mold. Well, especially this design. It kind of depends on your design, but this design is going to be easier to match up on a straight edge than the corner. So make a section of border that's a little wider than you need. Then you can wrap it around the corner. And like this one's got a little excess on it, so I'm just gonna trim that off. I'm gonna kind of undercut this and trim off those extra little bits. And what I'm doing is I'm getting ready for when I add another piece, I'll be able to do it neatly. So you can just wrap it around the corner, wherever it falls. And then when you add your other side, you can easily match up the next piece. So you can do that on the top and the bottom. And of course you want to use liquid clay on the back of all of your pieces, on the back of your tiles, and on the back of the strips that you add. And if these corners are particularly messy, you can even cut sections of this and wrap them around the edges. And it'll just look like a decorative element, and it'll hide all that mess. Just a couple more tips on these materials. First of all, I forgot to mention, you can use gold mica powder or any color you like. It really brings out the beautiful design of your border molds, whatever border mold you use. You can also use a clay blade to trim your tiles. Even though they're pre-baked, they trim pretty easily so that they match the shape. And finally, and very importantly, when you bake this, just go ahead and stuff your form with some crumpled aluminum foil. That way you won't have the problem of collapsing like I had the first time around. So I hope you're inspired by the supplies in the Create Along boxes to make all kinds of wonderful home dec. Once again, this is Sandy Huntress for Create Along. Happy creating.